13, Matthew 24, and it was about that whole thing about, Lord, do you see this the temple? And he says, "Assuredly, I tell you, there will not be one stone left on another, right? That will not be overthrown." And then, and they say, "Well, will you tell us when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" So they end up asking him two questions. Lord, when will the temple be destroyed? And then presumably those two things are related in their minds. And then when are you going to come back? And it turns out in his answer, it's two completely different events. There's the destruction of the temple, which is its own thing, and then there's his second coming. And if you remember, at least to the best of our ability, we were able to show that in Matthew 24, the bulk of the signs were just for the fall of the temple. Because when he was asked about the sign of his coming, he doesn't say anything. He says no one knows that day or hour. And then he immediately told us the parable of the fig tree, and then this idea of the master delaying his coming and us having to be faithful. Remember that was how it ended. It ended with a real simple, short parable. And it was this idea that there isn't going to be a sign. Everything's going to keep going, and then the Lord's going to come back. So you got to be aware. You got to be paying attention. Well, we're still in that conversation. That's the last thing he said, and is now continuing in to what we're talking about today. So we're on page 1317, and we're on chapter 25. And we'll just read this first parable. It's a series of parables. Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, "Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him." Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "No, lest there should not be enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves." And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with them to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered and said, "Assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." All right, it's a tough one. They're all going to be a little tough today. So this first parable that he tells, there's an important thing with understanding parables, and we have to really notice it here, but this is just for your future reading of parables. The point of the parable is the point of the parable. What is not the point of the parable, though, is not the point of the parable. So there's one little thing in there that we're going to say, what's the deal with that? And we're going to have to explain that, because a parable is intended to tell a particular fact. It is not necessarily like where you can go through every single thing and question the details, because sometimes the details are exactly what they are for a reason, especially if they feel illogical. Okay? So you'll probably notice, like when they say they can't share, like what's the deal with that? Especially in light of what the fathers teach us. So the fathers teach us that this parable of the 10 virgins is about mercy. Now, why? So the word oil comes from the Greek word for mercy. Eleos is both the root word for oil and mercy. And we've talked about this in the past, because oil provided a lot in the ancient world, right? Still does to this day. Oil can provide light. You can light a lamp with oil. Well, that's the example here. You can also use oil to help wounds, to help heal wounds. People still do that to this day. Less so now. We use Neosporin, but some homes may choose to use olive oil, and that's pretty common. It's also for food, so it's for good time. It's for fellowship, and these kinds of things, among other things. So the idea that the fathers see in this is that he is telling us that the oil that they have is the mercy they've shown in life. Okay? And specifically, what gives this away is a couple of the strange things. So we have this idea that there's 10 virgins. Some have a bunch of oil and some do not. And the bridegroom is delayed. Now, this would have been very unusual. It was normal, as is still the case at a Palestinian wedding, to not start eating until midnight. But yeah, but the bridegroom apparently doesn't show up on time in this case. And so in the meantime, while everybody's waiting for the party to start, they fall asleep. Well, the fathers tell us that their falling asleep is a sign that they die before the coming of the Messiah. Okay, so everybody falls asleep. So in other words, Jesus is saying his coming is so far away that people will die before he comes back. Okay, so this is why this is kind of important. So this idea is that during this life, as we distribute mercy to those around us, we accumulate oil for our lamps during what we might call the afterlife. This is our virtue. This is the point of life, by the way. The point of life is to gather up as much virtue, as much oil for our lamps as possible. And then you might be able to say, at death, God lights the lamp. And if we have oil, the lamp will light. But of course, if we don't, we're out. We don't get to participate in the eternal light, you could say, something like this. Kind of a metaphor, but it's helpful. So anyway, this idea is that, well, they bring some extra oil, meaning they do this merciful work. But these others, they don't do the work while they have the time to get the work done. So when the bridegroom arrives late, right, the girls with the extra oil, they have another dose. They can get that ready, and they light up their lamps. And they say, well, can you give us? And they're like, look, we don't even know when he's coming. No, I mean, we just brought enough for ourselves in case it got late. So you go, kind of in town, there are people, the same people I bought from, go to them. Well, the Holy Fathers teach us that this is, in this life, the poor are the people where we buy our oil. So for every dollar that we donate to those in need, right? So think here about, whatever, your tithe to the church, your gifts to the poor, your whatever it is, whatever we give away in this world, it's like we're buying oil in the afterlife. All right? And these people haven't done that in their life. They haven't shown mercy. So they get there and they say, help us out. Well, I can't. You've got to go get your own. So in their attempt to go get their own, they're not there when the bridegroom comes and takes everybody who's ready to go into the banquet. This would have been standard. Everyone would wait outside, and you could imagine the bridegroom shows up and everybody enters the house. And that house was sort of like a gated area. Because remember, the homes back then especially were hollow in the middle, and if it was raining, you'd live in the walls. If the weather's nice, you sleep on the roof. All right, and the animals you try to put in the middle of your house. Somebody could steal them, or an animal get to them and kill them. So this is like a fence house. Is kind of like what it was. So they're going in. They're going to go into that central area. They're going to have their party. Well, they miss out, and when they get back, they can't get in. The bridegroom says, I don't even know you. And this is another symbol that this oil might mean something a lot more than just the simple parable gives credit to, because this would not happen in a normal wedding. If the bridal party left for a little while and got there late, you'd let them in. But what the Lord of the feast says is, I don't know you, which is a sign that apparently this oil, our mercy, is our resemblance. We look. Do you look like one of mine, or do you not look like one of mine? Well, you have no mercy. This is going to come back in the end, because the last passage in this chapter is the one about when did we see you hungry or thirsty. So it's a play. It's already playing toward that fulfillment, is what the fathers tell us. But the upshot of this, even if we don't want to take the parable in the direction that the fathers do, which we should, because they're pretty good at this stuff. But even if we didn't want to look at it from the perspective of, well, what's all the symbolism mean? What it definitely tells us, again, about the end times, it's going to be a long time. It's going to be a long time. You're not going to be able to just do some good for a little while, and then Jesus is going to come back. This is going to be a long time. And remember what we read last week. We talked about, blessed is the servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. I assure you, he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if the evil servant says in his heart, my master has delayed his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants, to eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day he's not looking for him, in an hour he's not aware of, and he will cast him into outer darkness, remember? So see, if you follow it on that, the way Jesus does, and you follow straight into this parable, it kind of explains itself. A lot of time's going to pass. Are we going to be merciful? Are we going to try to store up as much possible oil for our lamps as possible? Or are we going to start mistreating people, get a little lazy, not really store up oil, and then we may run out of oil. Run out of oil. It's a word picture, right? Before Jesus gets back. Yeah. But then he's going to come at a time we do not expect. So the way that we are recognized by Jesus is by doing the works of Christ, right? I do not know you means you do not have mercy. I do know you is I recognize, you might say, I preached a sermon on this a year ago, the idea of the father saying, oh, you look like, or somebody say, you look just like your father, right? That idea. Oh, you look just like your father. I know you. You must be of the family because you look just like your father. That's how we should be with mercy and all the other virtues. Mercy could kind of be a catch-all for all the other virtues because it takes humility and it takes, right, gentleness and kindness and all those other virtues.
So would the symbolism of the holy unction and the sacrament, is that entered into this at all, or is it a little too early?
That's a good question. I mean, certainly with just the concept of oil, but here in particular, I wouldn't say that's the sacrament is in view here.
Okay.
This is the idea of like, what are we here to do? Because a lot of people struggle with life and they say, well, what am I here for? These parables actually explain to us what we're here for. We are supposed to be God's children. That doesn't mean that he made us. Actually, the Old Testament's very clear about that. God can be the creator without being your dad. Remember, Jesus even goes as far as to say to the Pharisees, you are not of my father, you're of your father, the devil. And what does he say? I know you by your works. You look like your father, the devil. So what he's saying here is we're born into this world, right? The children of God, and that's fine. But we also have to understand we have to grow in that resemblance. We're expected to resemble the Father. Yeah. Was that helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's what's kind of in view here. Okay, so Saint Theophylact talking here, by not showing mercy and giving alms in this life, they miss out on heavenly bliss. They are to buy and sell. We are to buy and sell with the poor and the needy and these kinds of things. It's an interesting kind of concept when you consider it like that. You can sort of buy your place in heaven by giving to the poor.
And actions always speak louder than words.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's not a riches and not being rich or not being rich. In fact, Christ seems to indicate that being rich is actually somewhat of a problem for giving stuff away, because most of the time when we're rich, we're less likely to give things away. We get too comfortable. We get too scared of losing our riches. That's the way that we feel confident that we'll be okay in the future, and so we don't like to give it away. We actually become attached to our wealth, is kind of the biblical idea. It's not that money is inherently the problem. It's the love of money that's the problem. And it's hard to have it and not love it, but that's true of everything in life too. It's not just Jesus isn't just picking on money, right? Yeah. Okay, so this is just the idea that, like, remember, the woman who gives her last 2 mites has given more than the rich person who's given 10%, right? So we don't never have to have in our minds that, oh, well, yeah, sure, if I had money, I could do this, but I can't. No, Jesus is never saying that. It's always accessible. And it's not just exclusively money either. It's mercy specifically. So it could be as simple as taking time out of your day to help that poor person find housing, as it is anything else. It doesn't have to be your house. It doesn't have to be your money that's paying for it. All right? But if that's what we have to give, that's fine too. All right, so we have to be diligent in virtue, have acts of mercy as much as possible, because the bridegroom's going to show up when no one expects him to. But once again, what did we learn about the end times in this passage? We don't know when it's going to happen. It's not a sign. There was a sign the virgins wouldn't have left. Right? There's no sign. So we can't get lazy, and that's the point. There's no sign of the end times, of our own death or of the last days. All right. So we'll move on to the next one, unless you all want to dig into this one. Yeah.
Is there any symbolism to the fact that 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish? Is it just like half of us are like knowledgeable and half of us aren't? Is that just kind of like a global?
You know, that's a really good question. 5 in the Bible typically symbolizes one of two things. The 5 books of the law, so those that keep the law. Now, there's something really going for that interpretation, because Theophylact makes a big point here. All 10 are virgins, meaning that all 10 are what we would say utterly pure. They have no, let's say you could say for the sake of the story, they have no sins. One group lacks virtue and one doesn't. See, one didn't sin but didn't do anything good either. One didn't sin and did works of mercy. And St. Theophylact does pick that up. So it actually is possible that the 5 and the 5 could be referencing both groups kept the law. Both groups did what God taught. But or didn't do the things God taught us not to do, but only one group actually did the work of God. Right? Because you see how we can do that? I mean, that's an interesting theological point or spiritual point for our lives. Avoiding sin is not our primary goal. It's a goal, but it's not a primary goal. The primary goal is doing the works of God. Being merciful is the goal. And the idea in the Bible is that if you filled your life with doing mercy, you wouldn't have time to sin. So like the Bible doesn't seem to be like, just lay in bed all day. Like just don't, whatever you do, don't break God's rules. No, it's like, no, you would be better off getting out in the world, getting in the gray areas, and doing your best to navigate that in a Christian way than it would be to lay in bed all day. Yeah, you didn't do a sin, but you did no one any good. You did not do the works of God. So we're not inactive. Christians are not passive. We're active. And a lot of times, for a priest, people come to confession of, Father, this thing in my life, and this is so hard, and is this a sin or is this not a sin? A lot of times it's like, okay, you almost want to say, okay, I know you're struggling with this sin, but it's good that you're out there trying, and that you're not just turning it off, right? The more we work with people, the more sometimes we'll be tempted, and maybe we don't do so well. But it's better that we're out there trying than that we're being passive, living in a hut, and just avoiding trouble. And since I brought up huts, remember monks and nuns that do live in huts, they're actually taking on war with the devils. They're not just sitting in a hut like we might sit in a hut, just try to avoid the world. They're actually taking on spiritual battles that we know nothing of, most of us. They're kind of our Marines, or the Navy SEALs of Christianity. They're getting in there and doing the deft work of sneaking around killing devils, and we're just in the main battle. Anyway, yeah.
It reminds me of the expression that ships are safe in a harbor, but that's not what they're built for.
That's a perfectly good way to say it. That's right. And so Jesus doesn't commend being safe in this way. It's get out, do works of mercy, trade with those you can trade with now, because there will be a time when they will not be possible. This is also the idea too, just to mention this, like after death, is that when we die, our soul dies in the state that it's in. So what that means is that this time of our eternal life, this is the time to work. This is the time that we're storing up heavenly goods for a future. But there will come a time where we won't be able to work anymore. And Jesus talks about that too. But when it's dark, there's no longer time to work. There's this idea that this is the time we have to store up grace. So we should be getting up as much of it as we can, picking up as much as we can, because at some point there won't be collection time anymore. And that's definitely present in here. All right, if that one wasn't hard enough, let's do the next one. And he goes on, notice he tells another parable, he begins it the same way. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. To one he gave 5 talents, another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and made another 5 talents. And likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground, and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, okay, there it is again. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents beside these. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents beside them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to one who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Once again, you'll notice at the end of the parable, one of those things I mentioned, what's not the point of the parable is not the point of the parable. The idea of taking the 1 and giving it to the guy with 10, it's not actually saying that there's something unfair going on. It's simply saying that the person who was entrusted with 1, he'll give what he was supposed to do to someone who did their job. It doesn't necessarily really mean we shouldn't overemphasize sometimes those little details. They just help us to understand the point, not the point. That's what I meant earlier about parables have that way about them. We don't ever want to make them try to answer questions they're not intended to answer. They get kind of weird at that point. All right. So once again, we're talking about the end times. So I'll turn it over to you all because I've been teaching this for 3 weeks now. What do you notice about the end times from this passage? Because it's still end times related. Any takers? What did you all notice?
Well, he talks about those that have done good would be enter into the joy of the Lord.
Okay.
So they will have eternal life.
Yeah.
For what they have done here on earth with their talents and how they've multiplied their talents here on earth.
Very good. Right.
Instead of, to your point, sitting there and laying in bed.
Yep. He right. We got that again. This idea that you had to make the money work. Right. Actually, to piggyback on that, and what did the guy who failed do? He didn't make the money work.
Right.
Right. He actually says you should have at least put it in the bank and would have gotten interest. Yeah, anybody else?
And then at the end, the final one that we're not supposed to read too much into.
Yeah.
There was weeping and gnashing of teeth, which obviously,
Yep.
regret and, maybe going to hell or, for not doing, having equal, maybe not equal, he only got 1 talent, but we don't all have the same gifts. Some have more gifts than others do, and they do the best with what gifts they have. In his case, he didn't do anything with the small gift he had, but a gift nonetheless. For him, it was everything. And there he is cast out.
That's right. Because if we wanted to tell the parable and it all ends well, what should the guy with the 1 talent have done? What's that?
Done something with it?
Done something with it, which then he would have said, here, I've got 1 more. Right? All those, I got 5, here's 5. I've got 2, here's 2. The guy with 1 should have been able to say, well, here's the 1 you gave me and the 1 I was able to make in the meantime. But he doesn't. He buries it in the ground.
I see a lot of Jesus giving us the opportunity opportunities to not only make something of ourselves in his name, but to escape our typical human standards and try to follow him. So it just seems like there's so many different ways of saying, I've given this to you, and are you listening or aren't you listening? I want you to follow me, but you're not, or maybe you are.
Mm-hmm.
So that theme seems to be consistent.
Yes, yes, very much. Yeah, and we notice that here, this idea that each person has to appropriate it for themselves. They put something of their own work.
Mm-hmm.
It really comes out in the I reap where I have not sown. I'm sure we'll talk about that too a little bit. But yeah, a very good point. All right, so yeah, those are all really good points. So this is the understanding of the end, right? It's not. It could be our death. It could be the end of time, right? That's the other thing that's kind of clear here. It's hard to differentiate between what's the end of time and what's the end of my life. And of course, I think that's on purpose. That's why part of the reason why the Lord's speaking in parables is actually more accurate, because it doesn't compartmentalize and limit. It kind of tells us, well, if you live before I get back, this is how you should live. If you live when I get back, this is what I hope to find, and everything in between we can think of, right? Well, for instance, well, Lord, when I'm young, how should I honor you? Versus when I'm old, how should I honor you? Well, according to the talent you have at the time. The Lord doesn't say you have to do the same things you did when you were 12 as you do when you're 82, but it does say you should be doing something with the talents that were given to you at 12 and 82, right? So it really helps. That's what's cool about parables, as you'll notice, is that they don't just give you one simple, oh, okay, I get it. They leave it open so you can apply it in your one day. You could look at this and say that the Lord comes every night. You go before your icon corner to go to bed for the night, and you check, did I invest my talents well today? You could do it that way. You do it every year at Pascha. Have I invested my talents in a good way every year? We can do it for our lifespan, and we can do it for human history. See, that's what's nice about parables, is they're not limited. So sometimes we'll get frustrated. Why doesn't the Lord just say it? Just tell us. Well, because He is telling us. If He told us just that, that's all we would get. This allows us to unpack it for our whole life, and it makes sense of every minute, makes sense of every hour, every day, every month, every year, every lifespan.
So for those who don't, because I struggle with this, because I have a lot of family members who do not believe in God, organized religion, any of the above.
Uh-huh.
But they do a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
And they put their time and talents towards good.
Yeah.
Are they, and I worry for their soul.
Right.
So with their little good works, do they build up pots of oil and, I mean, I really do worry about this.
Yeah. I think a good way for us to think about it, because again, the Lord leaves, most of the time when the Lord gives us a warning, He gives it to us, not our neighbor. Does that make sense? Like, if Jesus is telling you this warning to you, not to the person sitting next to you, because we're supposed to apply it to ourselves, not look over at our neighbor and be like, well, you're going to hell, right? So same deal here. So what we should do, I think, as Christians, is we should take this for ourselves very firmly, apply it to ourselves very rigidly, but then pray to the Lord that He'll receive our neighbor's offerings for what they are, that He'll receive them as it coming from an honest heart. It maybe didn't understand things the way that you would hope. So we don't want to just give like I guess as a priest I'm saying, I don't want to say that a person who just does good works and never, or he's even nasty to the Lord or whatever, that the Lord, based on this, is going to give him a free pass, because I don't know that. But what we can do as Christians, and we do in the Divine Liturgy, I'm sure everybody notices, we pray for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So our hope really is that through our faith, through our offering prayers on their behalf, that God will accept their offering. So we have an immense amount of hope in God, but we never want to be lackadaisical about it. So we would like them to come to the faith. We should share with them the gospel, and we should encourage them that, look, God's already so involved in your life, you can tell by your actions, right? And try to bring them along. But then we also shouldn't despair beyond despair for their souls should they pass away in that state. Because we can still pray for them, we can still offer gifts for them to the Lord and pray that the Lord will receive what effort they were able to make. And I don't know too many times I've heard this preached where somebody didn't mention that the talents that are given also include like faith. That some people are not given as strong a faith in this life, right?
Mhm.
Or the gospel's not even preached to them in other parts of the world. They may never hear the gospel, but God honors what they know of it, right? And that's very true. That's very well documented in the Bible. This idea that God judges us based on what we are given, what we know, not what we don't know.
Because I was at a seminar once with a very dogmatic priest. Kind of scared me.
Yeah.
And he was saying anybody who turns their back on Christ will never make it to heaven. And I'm like, but what about all the good people, who, and I immediately thought of, well, a lot of my family members who, I don't know if they turn their back, but I guess if you don't, they just don't believe.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll leave it at that. And I thought, so if you're a good person and you walk the walk, you just don't talk it, but you walk it, and yet you have a lot of people who come to church every Sunday and profess their Christianity and I'm saved and blee blah blue, and you go into coffee hour and you go, did you hear the sermon?
Sure.
So, but they didn't turn their back on Christ, but they they're supposed to just automatically go to heaven because they believe and they think in their life, but when you look at it, you go, really listen. So it's very confusing, and I know it's above my pay grade, but I just worry.
Yeah, it's again the Gospels, the way that we understand these things, they're given to us.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the sermon this week. They're given to us to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven,
Mm-hmm.
right? But everybody's held accountable for what they understand and what they are given in their life. We have to do the best with what we're given. I think everything you said is let's just apply this to the person who goes to coffee hour and then gossips,
Mm-hmm.
right, just profusely and destroys their neighbor. We can truly say from this passage, or from any other one, that person is not better off than the person who's outside the church, right? They're not better off. If anything, they're worse off because they know better.
They know better.
But they're not investing their life in the way that God has revealed himself,
Mm-hmm.
right? On the other hand, if we're going to talk about the unbeliever, the person who was born in the church but left the church, or the person who's never heard the gospel ever, we don't want to give over assurances, because partly that'll make us lazy. Well, they're good. They're really good people. Well, we don't need to be. We need to share the gospel with them. Like, we need to be doing our part. And also, we don't want to get overly complacent with them, because if they can grow, let's grow. That's good. So I think there's a reason why the Gospels never come just right out and say, yeah, don't worry about them. On the other hand, we know that based on this and based on other passages, God judges according to what's revealed to the person. That could be mental disability, for instance. If a person's born with a mental disability, they're not held to the same same content of faith as the theologian who teaches the 7 ecumenical councils in seminary, right? He is required. He's going to be held to a higher standard, but both are held to the standard according to their ability. So it gives us hope, but we should always be prayerful. I do want to mention something about this idea of the virtuous person outside the church and what happens. One of the things that's very clear in the book of Acts is that virtuous people outside the church get special attention from God, and he works more and more to reveal himself to those people. This happens a couple times in the book of Acts, where it'll say this man donated the synagogue to the people of that town, and he's a Roman centurion. And then God appears to him and says, I need you to go find this apostle. Okay, so we never need to like totally lament, because it's very likely that God is noticing their efforts and will lead them to what they need. So I think a lot of times we don't include God as a factor in the story. He's a big factor in the story. He does what he wants. So keep that in mind too. So if you know people who are struggling with that, pray that the Lord can reveal himself to them in such a way that they can come to believe. But we don't want to get complacent either. So you kind of see, the Gospels never leave us in a very comfortable place, because it doesn't want us to get, as all these parables are doing, lazy. Because that's what we'll do. And as a priest, like, I always want to be very careful. Say, oh no, the people outside the church are fine. No, why would I? Because then what, are we going to just come to church and not worry about them? Yeah, probably. Honestly, if I even felt that way, would I be negligent in my duties? Probably. Because you're like, oh, they're nice people. No, we need to have the mindset we're all required to do everything we can with the talents we're given. My neighbor who doesn't know Jesus, I'll introduce him to Jesus. My neighbor that does know Jesus but isn't keeping their life right, well, we'll do that then. We'll work on that. But mostly for myself. Okay. So let's go through this in the details of the and how the church fathers teach us with this. Okay. So the talents, that's a weight, right? So it's 5 talents of gold. Another 2, each according to his ability. That is his ability to invest it, right? There's like an investing thing here. Okay, and the Lord goes on a journey, which once again, long period of time, no sign of his coming. We're getting the point, aren't we? This whole end times fervor that we get, it's not for us, right? I'm not saying there isn't some validity to some signs. We can talk about that in a separate Bible study, but not these signs. So it goes on this long journey. And then we have this. So we have these 2 people. They do their investments, but the one guy goes and digs a hole in the ground and hides his Lord's money. Now, the fathers make clear that the money that is hid in the ground is specifically that he invests in the earth. So this idea is he puts his bet on what is perishing in this world. And I found this in a number of fathers. So the idea is these 2 people, they go out and they trade to get to gain more spiritual wealth. This guy's given 1 dime of spiritual wealth and takes his spiritual wealth and sticks it in the ground. So this could be the unrighteous person who invests in the world. Okay? Maybe they're charitable, whatever. That's neither here nor there. But this idea that like they put their gift, maybe they're very smart or they're very wise by nature, or they're whatever. They're whatever. They run business well, whatever the gift is. And instead of doing that for the betterment of their neighbor and God, they do it for their own selfish benefit. All right? They've invested it in the ground. Isn't that interesting? All the fathers talk about this idea that you can invest your talents in the ground. And that's this idea, too, that the breath that's given to Adam is from heaven. It's God's own breath. That God gives us that breath, but then we turn to what's perishing as being of more value than the breath that was given to us from heaven.
Maybe he put the money in the ground because he was trying to grow his money.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, and it's interesting, right? Because what he says too at the end. Yeah. So after a long time, the Lord comes. Okay, and each comes, and then we find out that God's judgment is not fair. Did you notice that? He gives 5 talents to the guy with the 5 talents. He judges him for the 5 talents, but he gave 2 to the other guy. Judges him for the 2. Right. So this goes to the point. What people are given is what they're responsible for, not what they're not given. Okay, so this kind of goes against, like you were saying, like the fundamentalist type of mindset, where one standard across the board. No, it's not one standard across the board. Everybody's judged according to what they're given. Now, how should we look at that? Should look at our own lives and say, have I actually invested everything I was given? Not look at my neighbor and be like, well, he's been given a bunch. He hasn't done anything with his stuff. No, this is applying it to ourselves. But they both make double. It's quite a bit different, though, if you think about it. 10 talents versus 4 talents in the end, right? It's quite a bit different, but the Lord of the land is very happy with both of their performances, and both of them say, and in both cases, you have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. So there's this idea that the end result is to be ruler over much in either case. Okay? So to your point about heaven, right? They're given far greater than they could have ever asked or imagined for their faithfulness. But then you have this guy. So let's look at what he says here. Lord, I knew you to be a hard man. Okay, so right there, that's a clue, because I was going to say, haven't we met people like that? Have we sometimes been those people? Lord, you're hard, you're stern. He blames the Lord for his failure to invest his money. It's like, well, you're pretty harsh, God. Like your judgment, is very, very difficult. So he turns on God. That's the Lord, but the story. And he says, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, here's what is yours. But notice, when the Lord responds, he then doesn't deny it. He doesn't deny the allegation. This is an interesting thing about God. You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. In other words, he says, if that's really what you think of me, then your actions still don't make any sense. Right? Mm-hmm. If you think I'm so hard and exacting, why did you do this? Right? Also, though, it's true. The guy's complaining, but his point's not wrong. He reaps where he has not sown and gathers where he has not scattered seed. What does that mean? What it means is that God invests in you and me, and we're to invest in our neighbor. You know that I sow that I gather where I have not sown. In other words, you're the plant I'm growing, but you're supposed to spill over to your neighbor. So now what's the difference here? Notice how we can take the same sentence and we can say it in a positive way as a negative way. Lord, you're a harsh man. You reap where you have not sown. Or we could say, Lord, I know that you reap where you haven't sown, so I... See what I mean? Like, it totally depends on mindset of whether this is heaven or hell. Right? And so in this case, he comes and acts like, well, it's your fault because you're just a jerk and everybody knows you're a jerk. And the Lord says, well, that doesn't jive really with what you did. You ought to have deposited money with the bankers. Now again, we have a second parable where it talks about trading with somebody. So who do we say were the people we were supposed to trade with before? Huh?
Poor.
The poor. Who are the bankers here? The poor. It's the poor through whom we are given interest in the kingdom of heaven. It's our neighbor is how we gain interest in the kingdom of heaven. This is how we gain our investment in the kingdom of heaven, is by loving our neighbor. Mercy. Okay. And at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. And then he takes that talent away from him. So what's this idea? He gave him spiritual life to begin with. And this is a really important idea. We're all given spiritual life to begin with. Nobody's born without it. We're supposed to do something with it. We're supposed to double it. As Patty said early on, it's this idea that we are required to appropriate it for ourselves. Some of the work is going to have been ours. Because again, if all the work is God's and none of it's ours, he can't say, well done, good and faithful servant. Because we didn't do anything. Right? Like if John's got to go change the light bulbs in the church, but then he goes in there and God just magically turns all the light bulbs, And then John comes in and I say, good job, John. John's going to have to say, well, actually, Father, weirdest thing happened. All the light bulbs just fixed themselves because John knows it wasn't him. So well done, John, good and faithful servant. No, John knows it's not mine. Here, God does say, well done, good and faithful servant, because the 5 given are doubled. The 2 given are doubled. We have a role in our salvation. And it's according to the ability we start with. Some of us are given 5 talents, some of us are given 2. Does that make sense? We are supposed to just do with what we're given, but we are supposed to do with what we're given. So again, what is it? Don't be lazy. In fact, that's the way that the Lord responds to him. You wicked and lazy servant. So now we've had 2 parables in a row. How often do we take these parables? We make them about the end times. But you're already feeling they ain't just about the end times, are they? They're about our daily life. Right? They're about our own lifespan, not even necessarily the Lord's coming. Although that's included. Some generation's going to be the last one. But we don't know which one or whether we're it, right? Yeah.
So, Father, we've talked a lot about parables, and they aren't black and white.
Yes.
Much as many of us would like that to be the case.
Right.
So, do you feel Jesus likes them being a little more gray and leaving them a little more interpretation of ours? Just like in a classroom, a teacher wouldn't always say, well, here's the answer, but I want you to seek it, I want you to search for it, and then all of us relate to things in different ways, so
Correct.
that possibly the parables, John and I would look at the same parable, we might get something slightly different out of it, hopefully, fairly consistent, but you feel Jesus trusts us enough with our knowledge, and our hope in our heart that we will come to the right kind of conclusion, but just maybe either in our own time or in our own mental framework?
You nailed it. I couldn't say it better.
Okay.
I think that's, that's very, that's,
Cookies.
it's very, yeah, more cookies. Yeah, that's what we got out of today. Yeah. No, like 100% everything you just said. That's God. It's so beautiful the way you said it. God is entrusting each one of us with our life. Your life is the parable God's telling you too. Right? And so often people will say, will be looking over at their neighbor and they'll say, why did God let that happen to my neighbor? But they never think that maybe their neighbor was given a special message from God for them to unpack. My job is to be next to my neighbor and help them bear it. But it is very possible that's not my mail to open. They have to open it. And that's what each of our lives are. Each of our lives are this message just for me. And yes, God is entrusting it to you. That is, he's entrusted your life. In this case, he's entrusting you with the interpretation. And the reason for that is that what you need to keep going and what AJ needs to keep going are not going to be identical. Now, maybe at a different time in life, you'll switch. Right? He'll get a different thing out of the parable, and you'll get a different thing out of the parable.
And that's okay.
And that's okay, too. That's exactly right. There can't be easy answers to this because we're supposed to be painting a masterpiece. You don't paint a masterpiece with paint by color. All right? Paint by number. So it's like, when we're little, it's paint by number. Do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. When you grow up, do this, don't do that. But then when it's ours, it's not paint by number. It's God's masterpiece that we're helping. We're helping along. So yes, it really takes us to live this life. And I think a lot of the problems that we have sort of with like what's going on with my neighbor and what's going on with society, what's going on, it's because we don't entrust them with their own story. And I think a lot of people don't want to be entrusted with it. But you can't become a God and not be able to be trustworthy. God would be crazy to give someone who cannot be trusted what he intends to give them in heaven.
And it reminds me of how we educate our children and also in the school system. And you all may have heard stories about maybe in the younger, lower grades, they'll say draw a tree or draw your family, or draw a dog. And the little ones will do their best, and that's their interpretation. And then, unfortunately, there are educators out there who will say, oh no, that's not how you're supposed to do it.
That's right.
Not what it looks like, or you didn't stay in the lines, that's not right.
Mhm.
And so thinking, again, that it's not giving us a bit of freedom or our own interpretation, and it's shooting people down if
That's
they
right.
don't quite see. And I think it's very hurtful to hear teachers do that.
Yeah.
And they do.
They do, and I think that likewise with the spiritual life, right? That's actually the reason God tells us we're not supposed to judge our neighbor.
Mhm.
He says, what business is it of one servant to judge another servant? In other words, just because I gave, if I'm the master of the house, just because I gave that servant the job of washing the pitchers doesn't mean I gave all the servants the job of washing pitchers. The other guy might be sweeping the floor, right? So a lot of times when we're judging, that's what we're doing. We're coming along somebody and say, you're drawing outside the lines. The teacher's not going to like that very much. When in fact, the Lord is entrusting them. And some of that's going to be accidentally coming outside the lines or maybe drawing a messy picture every now and then. But the end goal remains the same. So it's very hard to sit next to another kid drawing the same picture as you. It's totally different. And to be okay that the teacher's going to be okay with both pictures. But the Lord is entrusting us with it. The Lord is entrusting us with that. And so we have to have that mindset with others as well. So yeah, it's a good example. And that's why we have to be very careful judging others. Because that's what we're doing. You can't draw that. That's very bad. Or especially what if a priest did that? Right? Because then you're going to feel really bad. You're going to feel, well, maybe I'm not very spiritual because he keeps condemning me every time. Right? This is why in confession we don't have judgment. Right? We might have to set some things straight. You stole, you're probably going to have to give some of that back in confession, right? But it's never about condemning. Because we're all charged with the same task, albeit different talents. We're all supposed to double what we're given. Some of us may be given more in one area than another.
I like the story of the guy who wants a different cross to bear instead. It's like kind of similar.
Share it with us.
Like if he wanted a different cross because he thought his was too difficult, and then he was like, "Oh, here, you can pick any one you want." So, but he picks up the same one that he had before because they were all too big or too heavy or something. And then I don't know. I guess I kind of made the connection of like everybody's spiritual life is different, so you can't judge it and invest your talents one way and condemn someone else for doing his another.
That's right. God's given us our own cross because it's catered for our own salvation, right? Well, how about we read the last parable and we'll just call that a day because this last parable is going to bring it all together, and I'll bet you there's not much to talk about. All right, this is probably the clearest parable we're going to get, or maybe I shouldn't even call it a parable. This is exactly what's going to happen, I guess. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all his holy angels with him. I'm on verse 31 on page 1318. Then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." I just want to mention very briefly, prepared for you for the foundation of the world. That's prepared for everybody. That's what God did this for. He wants everybody to inherit this. But it turns out these are the only ones who do, okay, by their own choice. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty or give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will say to them, "Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." Then he will also say to those on the left hand, "Depart from me, you cursed, in everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels." Notice, not prepared for human beings. All right? "For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger and you did not take me in, naked and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison and you did not visit me. Then they will also answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. So just like the last parables we saw, mercy. Mercy. How do we get interest? How do we trade our money with the bankers? Our neighbor. How do we buy oil for the afterlife? Our neighbors. This is why love of neighbor and love of God are interrelated. Right? In fact, here we find out love of neighbor is love of God. That turns out how we treat our neighbor is actually how we treat God. And the other thing I always love in this parable, just to share my own ideas here, I love the fact that both are surprised. Both are surprised. The people who did good, they said, when did we ever do anything so good as that? And then the evil say, Lord, I've done everything you just said. Right? Yeah. So, and this goes again to your earlier point, Corrine, that what do we do with our loved ones who are outside, right? Is that we want to be aware of this other category. Though I've done enough. Lord, when did I ever see you in prison and didn't give you something? Right? You see? That's that mindset, because I think sometimes what the Lord wants is an honest and pure heart, or as we say, in every service practically, a humble and contrite heart thou, O Lord, will not despise. But that you can see that attitude, both of us in the church and outside the church, we can hear that attitude. Well, if God sends me to hell after everything I've done for my neighbor, oh, you may not know who you're talking about. On the other hand, if somebody says, I know, I've given everything I can. I just all I got left is prayers. I'm out. I can't help. No, that person's heart's in the right place. They're trying to give, and they just, right? You see how that works? Yeah. So this gives us a perfect picture. Notice this isn't a parable. He says, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to sit on my throne. The angels are going to come. I'm going to divide everybody, and then I'm going to tell the one what you've done, and I'm going to tell the other what you've not done. And it all centers around mercy for neighbor. The whole judgment.
So it's kind of like what Metropolitan Saba was talking about. The worst thing is arrogance and pride, because you can't get to mercy if you're stuck on that.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that interesting?
It is.
You take that vice, pride and arrogance, and in and of itself, it doesn't seem so damning, right? But boy, it is, because it closes the heart off to everything else, which is what we keep seeing with the Pharisees that we've seen the whole time. It's not really that their answers are always wrong. It's that their heart is just cannot handle what Jesus is putting down. Right? Just can't enter it. That's the biggest danger for all of us. Again, a humble and contrite heart. When, oh Lord, did we ever see you in this and didn't do something? Or gave you drink? Oh, well, whenever you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. So it turns out this is the other thing that I preached on this some years back, because it's a neat thing in the passage the fathers pick up, is this idea. So a lot of people think of the second coming, which I don't like that phrase. It's not really the biblical phrase. It's not a coming. It's a revelation. That's why the book of Revelation is called the Revelation, the apocalypse, the unveiling. So what actually happens here, did you notice? He doesn't it's not like he comes out of the sky exactly or something like this. It's that the veil of reality is pulled back. And it turns out that when the veil was there and I gave to my neighbor, veil opens. It was him. Right? So it's a revelation.
He's always there. Really.
Yeah, he's really
Just
always
all
there.
Of a sudden appearing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So what happens, so kind of if you envision it that way, it's the unveiling is going to be this veil just going, and you see everything for what it really was. That every act of charity was actually a gift to God. Right? And every act of stinginess was a distance from God. Right now the veil is still pulled. It's not all is not revealed. It's all behind a veil, but one day, right? And what's revealed? How is he revealed? He's revealed in my neighbor, right? Which is really a neat idea. Just this idea of the revelation of Jesus Christ, which is, by the way the book of Revelation starts. This is the revelation of Jesus Christ, the unveiling, who he really is, and how do we see him in Revelation? Glowing, right? Full of light, all the things we didn't see in the Gospels, except when he unveiled himself on Mount Tabor.
I was gonna say, yeah, we did on the Transfiguration.
Just the one. Otherwise, the Pharisees look at him, they don't see. The revelation shows us what was always true. It's just the veil hadn't been pulled back. And then when he does pull the veil, what are the apostles, the three apostles? Ah!
It's too bright.
Yeah, it's too bright. We can't even handle it. So that's what you can think of. That's what the end times action going to be like. So all of a sudden it's just.
I hope in the coming 3 weeks with politics and prior to the election,
Oh, Lord, have
maybe there's
mercy.
a bit more mercy.
I doubt it.
Yes. Wouldn't that be something? I mean, mercy all around, really.
Correct.
Yeah. It's it's so hard to be a Christian during election season because no party represents mercy in the way that we have mercy, love in the way that we have love, even community in any sense of, especially now, but it does seem to be getting worse. But any sense of responsibility for our whole community instead of just the team we're on. Yeah, it's very concerning. But we need to keep praying. I never we never want to close the chapter. It's when we stop trying that it really gets bad. So I'm still hopeful. There's so many good signs, but our politics is not one of them.
No, it's not set up to be. That's the problem.
No, it's not. It's not. But there was a time, various times in our country, usually following really hard times, which is sad. There are times when our country does come together, though, and starts to recognize the need to be a community and to think like a community. I think a lot of times when many people think of the good old days in America, or like this golden age, was actually a time in which that was the mindset, that I was responsible for my neighbor, and maybe it grew and grew and grew and grew, and it did. But then somewhere along the lines we stopped that mindset, or maybe we changed it for something else. I don't know. It's hard. I don't like politics right now. I don't even know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm trying to teach my kids about voting, and you look at this stuff and you're just like, I don't even know.
Yeah.
But we have a king.
Amen.
I was, because I'm so turned off by politics, I'm totally entrenched in the NFL.
Yeah.
And college football. And with everything behind the scenes going on, and I was telling Nicholas this morning, if we held our politicians to the standards we hold college and professional coaches, this world, our country would be unstoppable.
Isn't that interesting?
I mean, my goodness, the scrutiny and everything that goes into building a team and how they negotiate and this, that, and the other thing for the glory of a ring, which I get, I love, I'm all into
She
it.
loves jewelry.
I love jewelry and I love that bling, but I love football, college and pro. And I'm looking at it so that all the machinations of behind the scenes, we don't hold our politicians to 1/100th of the responsibility that we hold these coaches to and these players. Now, if you pay a quarterback $50 million, you should expect something. But college or even high school,
Yeah.
because of all the expectations, I mean, my goodness, it's nuts.
Isn't it
It's
crazy?
fun, but it's nuts.
It is the hypocrisy of our time is really interesting.
It's
The things we'll
bonkers.
tolerate
Yes.
in some people and the things we won't tolerate in others. And boy, is it writ large right now in politics. But it's so strange because, like, as a priest, you meet a lot of people who, you know, kind of they don't want the Christian morals, right? They want to
Oh,
get
no.
rid of all this, but then you look at how quick they are to condemn someone for a mistake
Yeah.
or ruin their life for a mistake, you know, and you go, wait a minute, like even our morals, we wouldn't like tell a person you're never allowed to be a human again because you did X, Y, or Z. So it's very strange right now. I find it like the hypocrisy. I mean, the politics is wild. The stuff, like when I was a kid, I remember, like with, I was young, I don't know how old I was, but like with the Clinton era,
Mhm.
right? And this idea of like what was unacceptable. Now in our politicians, it's
Don't
like, no, that's a given. That's probably been done like 10 times by this person. But I just can't get over it. It's like, how can it change that much in such a short period of time?
Oh my goodness.
But our
yes.
morals are just so off as a culture. But again, you know, as stepping back into my role as a priest, I feel like, you know, that's what we have to pray for. We have to pray
Mhm.
for our country and have to pray for our leaders. Is that it's not over till it's over. You know, I think there's too much hand wringing and not enough people going out and being what they need to be in their community. That's what I feel. There should less and less people are willing to care about their neighbor, like literally their neighbor. And I don't even mean like Jesus' broad definition of neighbor. I mean like not even knowing what's going on in the house next to me and caring about what's going on. That probably if we just, even if Toledo, if we were the only city in the country who started to care about our neighbors, it would probably bleed over into the whole country. Because we just don't.
No.
Everybody's putting on a facade, a face, and nobody's paying attention to the neighbor really. Few and far between anyway. So, Lord have mercy. Let us pray. O Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all people, light to lighten the Gentiles and the glory of thy people Israel. Glory to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and